Good morning, welcome to KWS Connect event. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to try and do today's presentation in a very quick half an hour, so we're going to be as concise as possible. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat function, and we'll progress through from the winter barleys to the winter wheats, looking at oilseed rape, followed by a Q&A session at the end. We're very lucky today, we've got some fantastic speakers. So I'm James from KWS, we're joined by John Miles. He's here to lend a technical aspect to our varieties, and joined here by Kirsty Richards, who's going to be looking at our varieties from an end use and marketing pool. We also have Julie Galt on the call, who will cover oilseed rape, and not forgetting Yasmin and Jasmine, who have done a lot of the hard work up until now in order setting this software up, and they're running it in the background. So we'll kick off, and any questions you've got, please put them in the chat. And we have two external speakers today. We have Gareth Bubb of Bayer, and we have Stuart Carpenter of ADM, who will be lending their expertise as we go through the presentation. So we're going to kick off on terms of winter barley, looking then at the winter wheats, followed by oilseed rape and the question and answers. And I would say to you, put as many questions as you want in the box as you progress through. Let's start. So I mean, in terms of barley, we're only going to look at one today. We're going to look only at KWS Hawking. So Hawking is available this summer. You can order it this autumn. It's new from KWS. In terms of what I want from a two-row barley, you know, yield is going to be king for the feed market, and you will find that Hawking is the highest yielding one there. In terms of sort of agronomics, it's coming from Tower. It's got some pretty good parentage, and I'll pass on to John, who's going to talk us through the agronomics quickly of Hawking.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I mean, the barley market, I mean, a lot of our varieties are based on, you know, good background, and cassia is still a big figure in the market. Horwell obviously came in much stiffer, you know, the stiffest barley, two-row barley on the market. Does have a bit of a mildew issue, but it is incredibly stiff strawed, and that was the yield target. Last couple of years we've had some introductions, very good eastern performance, but the sort of lodging and leaning figures are a bit high, and if you've got fertility, they're, you know, probably not for you. Where Hawking fits is you've got this similar yield level, you've got improved mildew on top of Orwell. Not quite as stiff. I don't think the RL figures are quite accurate, but if you look at the data behind it, very, very similar to cassia. So I think, you know, people have been waiting for a cassia replacement, and I think Hawking stands a good chance of being that. James.
Thank you, John. And what I'll do, because Stuart's on today's call, if I pass on to Stuart Carpenter, who will talk us through just quickly the barley markets, if I could in a nutshell, please, Stuart. Stuart, can you hear me? We may have some technical issues there. I'll tell you what, we'll move to the wheats, and we'll come back to Stuart, and he can cover the barley market in a little bit. So in terms of wheats, we're going to look now at KWS Zyatt. We're moving into the group ones, and I shall pass to Kirsty Richards, who will kick us off with Zyatt.
Lovely, thanks very much, James. So KWS Zyatt, as many of you will know, is the UK's highest yielding group 1 wheat. But when you look at it from a milling and baking perspective, it's all about the fact that Zyatt is probably one of the most flexible products we've got in the bakery at the moment. So obviously it produces a group 1 specification in terms of protein level, Hagberg and specific weight, but it's more about the quality of protein that Zyatt produces. You can see here in the pictures some work that we did with Sean Taylor from Hovis over a number of years. And you see the type of product that Zyatt's really good at producing. And the key here is that it's very consistent, and that's something that obviously group millers and bakers are looking for. So in terms of end use potential, Zyatt's got a big tick and looks to be one that we will be focusing on for the near future. Now, if Stuart can hear, I wonder if he'd share with us his thoughts about the group 1 market at the moment. Are you there, Stuart? No, I don't think we can quite get him. So I'm now going to pass you on to John, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the agronomics around KWS Zyatt.
Thanks, Kirsty. I mean, one of the things we know with the group, and this is a table, I should say, with varieties ranked in septoria order, and this top 10, top 12 is always quite interesting. And we can see Zyatt in here with a 6.4 on the score at the moment. We've got Crusoe coming in at a 6.2 and Skyfall at a 5.8. So they're all around that sort of 6.5 level. We'll come back to Septoria in a second. I think the key is we have seen, all of these varieties do have a bit of a rust issue. We know Crusoe, Skyfall, and Zyatt has got a little bit worse in the last couple of years, and from a management point of view is in the same ballpark as Skyfall in terms of rust potential. So that is one of the key things. And whilst we might look to other varieties to lower our risk, there isn't anything in the pipeline at the moment. The candidate variety in recommended list trials looks like a 2, and so we'd be then looking further upstream at national list 2. So if you are a milling wheat grower, then and rust has been an issue, it has been a bad rust year, then in terms of varieties, you are kind of where you are. I mean, Gareth, I'll throw this question to you. I mean, in terms of rust, I mean, thoughts on this year, and also what the 6s and 6.4s for Septoria show in terms of management, please.
I would say, if you're talking about rust, I would say most varieties will get it. I think it's relatively easy to control, but you've just got to start early and keep your intervals tight. So I wouldn't be put off by it, but I think that would be a basis for looking after the yellow rust. And Septoria, there's a whole range of 6s there, as John said, and that's got to be the base. And I know he's going to talk about the varieties later on, which are stronger, but that's where you need to be really for Septoria.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the key things, and that's where obviously we see the likes of Zyatt not really going anywhere in that respect, James.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. So moving on now, we'll look at KWS Extase. So ultimately one of the most exciting varieties to hit the market, I would say, for a very, very long length of time. It's the ultimate risk management tool as far as I see it, and there is an argument that every farmer in the UK should be looking at this variety. I think there's a part on farm in every farm for it. And what I'll do, I'm going to pass straight back to Kirsty, because it is a Group 2, and let's hear what the millers think.
Okay, thanks very much, James. So yes, as you just mentioned, KWS Zyatt is a Group 2 milling wheat, and that doesn't mean that it's a failed Group 1. It is a very specific thing, the Group 2, from a milling and baking perspective. It means that it's either something that's used for a very special range of products. A great example here would be something like Soissons, you remember from the past, that was used for French-style products in the bakery. Or it's something that is not quite as flexible as a Group 1. So you'll remember all those applications that Zyatt was useful for that we saw in the Group 1 sector. Extase is great for a number of applications, but perhaps doesn't fulfil all of the applications that a baker may need. But the good news is there are buyback contracts out available for this. They range from full spec 13% protein right back to 11% with fallbacks. So it is something that millers are really keen to learn more about, and we expect to see them sort of gain a better understanding over the next harvest. Stuart, I don't know whether you've got any comment about Group 1s and 2s in terms of premium potential looking forward.
Can you hear me? Don't think she can.
Yes.
Yes,
right,
I can.
We're on. Good. Yeah, I mean, interesting market going forward, because we're looking at significant premiums for Group 1 for this coming harvest and possibly going forward. And there's quite a lot of discussion about the import tariffs that are being muted as coming in on the 1st of January, where there's talk that there will be no import tariff for high protein milling wheat such as Canadian, but lower tariffs for feed wheat and for low protein milling wheat. So it's all up in the air, to be honest, and there could well be, with the premiums being high this year, quite an appetite for things like Extase.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much. So I think, John, you're going to take us through the agronomics now of Extase.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. I mean, obviously, what the sort of mindset of the Western farmers, the risk of Septoria has started to creep east, and people are seriously thinking about, disease resistance in varieties. And it's something, growers in the West have known and utilised for a long period of time. So in front of the curve in that respect. One of the things we've been quite trying to talk about with Extase is, we do have major gene resistance. When you have a variety of, near 7s, 8s, 9s, then there are major genes active within that variety. And of course, that needs a level of protection, because that could be eroded quicker than, lots and lots of genes all working together. So we would always argue there is a reasonable spend level depending on the risk. And for Extase, I think it's too crude to talk about a blanket spend level with something like this. I mean, we have got one of the highest Septoria scores on the recommended list, so that's a very useful attribute. And of course, we should be able to lean on that, and I think that's our language we've been using, leaning on varieties more now. It is an old story, perhaps, this buying time, but we see it now as being more relevant than ever before. We have lost some of this curative activity that we would have had 10 years ago, so we need to farm in a more protectant situation. And this slide, the progression of Septoria since 2017, I have been using since 2017, because for me this is beautifully what a resistant variety actually means to you on farm. And you can see the level of DNA in the leaf here, and we start with dear old Trinity, which was a 5 and a bit, and already T2 timing, there is already Septoria DNA detectable within that leaf. And then when we come to a 6, a near 7, and if we imagine an 8 for Extase over here, then obviously you would expect no Septoria in those leaves. But of course, we don't live in a perfect world where everything goes on at the right time, and obviously 10 days late on a T2 is less than far from ideal. But we can see significant increase in the amount of Septoria in a Trinity, and then as we come to a 6, there's obviously an increasing amount in here, less so, and if you can imagine in Extase, there will be an even smaller amount in here. So it really is, for me, I think Septoria, should, depending on the risk, Extase should be one of the cheaper fungicide options that we're looking at. But it's more about flexibility for the farm. It's more about, enabling the chemistry to work more effectively. And for you guys further west, when you know what proper pressure can be, it is about protecting yield, and that's what, I think the rest of the farmers in the UK are coming to terms with. But I mean, Extase in the field, Gareth, I mean, I think you're very much, obviously these are your slides. I mean, would you comment on this and your slides next, please?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's we've said it before, and James has said it. It is definitely a management tool, and it also buys you time on your other varieties and things. So, and we need the genetics to help the chemistry, and the chemistry to help the genetics. So, just a couple of practical examples, and this is from this year. So this is, I know it's over in the east, but we've got it's with James Knott, who's a grower over there, and we've got a couple of different fields there, A and B. And we have things by risk. So one was sown a bit earlier in October, one in December. So obviously the one in December there is a green for a lower risk. The earlier sowing is a higher risk. And then on that we have the earlier one, it's a lower risk variety like Extase for Septoria, and Kerin, which is a higher risk Septoria variety on that December sown. You look at the weather, because that has an effect. It was warm and wet over the winter, which is quite a higher risk thing for Septoria, but it was dry in March and April. So again, a lower risk. So where are we? Which one will have the more latent Septoria when we come into T2? There's lots of different factors. And we've tested these. We tested leaf 2s just before the T2s went on. And we have a scale there. It's a logarithmic scale. The numbers don't actually really mean a huge amount, but if you look at it, the Kerin there, which was sown later, so you'd have thought it would be low risk, had that much amount of Septoria DNA in it. And if you look at the Extase, which was sown higher, had much lower levels of Septoria. Despite being sown early, the genetics there has really helped us out. So there was a lot less Septoria in that variety going into T2, and that's how we should use these varieties. It gives us a lot more time. So obviously in that scenario, the Kerin would be a much higher risk. So it just buys us a bit of time if we've got some Extase on the farm as well.
I think, what we've been talking about, isn't it, Gareth, in terms of it's that combination of variety and all your cultural control measures, that really make a big difference.
Yeah, the two biggest things are variety and drilling date. And, maybe look at this one. Obviously, the variety has a bigger weighting than the drilling date. So, if you sow it early, it does mean a lower risk than a more septoria-prone variety being drilled a bit later.
Cool, thank you. I mean, this is where I think we see Extase possibly fitting in terms of the value of the earliness as well. Obviously, it is a very vigorous variety coming out of French breeding, so it's very fast to move, quite erect. So it's not a proper early driller, but it has got strong resistance. So we want to sort of put it at that sort of part, that main drilling window to being able to to sort of cope with the septoria risks. The other way we see it using is like Cordial, really, in terms of a later drilling using a lower risk slot and a high resistant variety. But one of the things we really see, and we'll touch on it with Parkin in a minute, is the value of earliness. And what you see on the recommended list is a little bit different what we actually see on farm. And this is dry downs from the same date, same drilling date. And then we look at Extase and Parkin here, along with Zyatt, and compared to a Lily and a Siskin and things like that, you're looking at the same drilling date. You're looking at about 4 days combining difference between them. And if we sort of factor that in with scheduled drilling, we could be looking at even more. So I think we see two ways, James, of using Extase.
Thank you very much, John. That's really interesting. I mean, it's a big topic, Extase, and to try and fit that in is pretty difficult. We could probably talk about it all day. So I mean, next Firefly, so we're looking at a group 3. We've heard, that Extase has got that headline untreated yield and is going to be the risk management. I think Firefly is probably going to be one of those tools that is perhaps a little bit overlooked. You're looking at one of the stiffest variety on the recommended list, one of the biggest drilling windows, and again, it has a 7 for septoria. So it's got a lot of attributes that John and Gareth will no doubt tell us all about in a moment. But I will pass to Kirsty and she'll let us know what the Miller Sports Firefly are.
Great, many thanks, James. So I will pass over to Stuart in a moment, and hopefully we'll manage to get him back to talk a little bit about potential for the Group 3 premiums going forward. But Firefly, in a nutshell, is a bit of a return to a proper biscuit type in a miller and a baker's perspective. What they're looking for is a variety that produces a dough that can be stretched over a certain distance and actually has the right force needed to stretch that dough over the right distance. So in essence, the key requirement of a UK Group 3 is that when they make it into a dough, they need to stretch it out over 16 centimetres and above, that black line there. And as you can see, KWS Firefly does that. Sorry, my slides are I think someone's pressing them. KWS Firefly does that really consistently, and that's the absolute key. It's about having a consistent product time after time in the mill and the bakery. Because obviously, as a biscuit manufacturer, when they're running a plant 24/7, you need to get the right shape of biscuit, the right number of biscuits in a pack time after time. So Firefly, really good potential in the mill. And just to mention also, it has UKS as well. Key point here being that its P over L is well under that 0.55 requirement of a UKS product at 0.3, and that's something the export millers are certainly looking at. So Stuart, if we can reach out to you again, I wonder what you think about Group 3 premiums looking forward to 2021. I can't hear Stuart. I don't know if anyone else can. No. Okay, well, hopefully we'll try and get him back in a second. Poor Stuart. Okay, so in a nutshell, a return to a proper Group 3, if you like, in KWS Firefly. So that is something that the end users will be requiring. John, just take us through the agronomic aspects of Firefly now.
You're on mute, John.
This early in the week. One of the things we talk about being missing on the RL a bit now is properly stiff straw, and Firefly and Parkin have some of the stiffest straw available, or certainly Firefly does the stiffest straw available. I think what's always interesting is when you look at how a variety performs on the in the early sown trials, because you need very high tillering ability, you need good standing and the ability to finish nicely, and Firefly tops that. So, you know, considering, you know, we do need to watch the brown rust, the yellow rust has got in it a bit more this year, but we do have a 7 Perceptoria and it's stiff. You know, I think this could be an earlier drilled variety further west. And we can look at the cost of, I mean, I don't know, I think we do this in our heads, but there is an AHDB risk analysis tool in terms of looking at drilling date, fertility, seed rate, and you can pull apart some of these differences, some of these varieties. So I think, in terms of managing risk and inputs, there are differences between varieties on the RL now. James.
Thanks, John. So the next variety we're going to talk about is Parkin. I suppose the first thing to address when talking Parkin is where it sits in terms of recommendations. So it was due to be recommended to the recommended list this November, just gone, but actually it didn't get on there, which we see as a bit of a shock and probably a bit of a shame. In terms of the variety, it's the one that we had the most hype about in terms of from farmers, from the trade, and it's got some fantastic attributes that I think are going to be essential to farming going forward. So I'm going to pass to Kirsty, who'll pick up the story on Parkin.
Yep, lovely. Thanks, James. So KWS Parkin, as you've mentioned, wasn't recommended in November. If you do want to have a look at its vital statistics, as it were, it is actually the data from AHDB is printed in the current book. I think it's page 14. And the reason the variety wasn't recommended, the elephant in the room, if you like, was the fact that it didn't quite hit that Group 4 yield target that it had to do to get recommended. But the reason we have, you're going to be seeing a lot in the press about Parkin as we go forward, and the reason that we're sort of fully backing this variety at KWS is we think there is so much more to it than yield. But really just to kind of cover off why we think it's got good yield potential, this is our own KWS data that we've collected over a number of trial sites. This is Harvest 2018 and Harvest 2019. And what you see here is we've got KWS Parkin over here. It's performed reasonably well when you look at it up against the typical varieties that you'd see within that Group 4 sector. Now you may have read that Parkin is the new Grafton, and I think John's going to talk to you a little bit more about that, why yes and no is the answer to that. But let's see, really, if you think back to Grafton, why we think Parkin has a place on farm, and it's kind of why why Grafton did, really. So this is the AHDB data set, which looks at the performance of Parkin in the early drilled slot, and this is before the 25th of September. And there you'll see that actually put it up against the commercialised Group 4s that we've got in the marketplace at the moment, you see it's no slouch in terms of its yield potential. But we believe there's even more to Parkin than just yield, as I've said, and a lot of that is to do with earliness. If you look at all the varieties on the RL at the moment, you'll see there's nothing less than a 0 in terms of maturity. And if you think back to 2012, something like 15% of the market was made up by varieties that were, very early and below this 0 rating. So we've done a lot of work on Parkin. Here's a graph here which shows you the dry down that's measured by our trials team. And this is the data from 2019. And what you can see here, it's clearly a race to who gets to 15% moisture, 16% moisture. And Parkin is the orange line, and it does this consistently. So if you were to kind of equate it to a score on the AHDB list, it would be a -1. But what does really that mean in reality on farm, John? What is the value of that?
I guess it's quite hard to know. That sort of difference on the RL is really quite hard to pull apart. So what we did was we asked quite a number of farmers and agronomists around the country in terms of, when you had something like Grafton, what was the rate, the harvest date, and then when you had something like a Santiago or a Diego, what was the harvest date there, and where people used Grafton and Cordial and Gallant and drilled them as one of the first wheats, they stayed in front of some of the others, and they offered, significantly early harvest, and I think that's where we see Extase and Parkin offering something valuable. And as you can see, further south, those are big differences, and as we go further north, they do disappear a bit. But we are looking at a variety where we could be looking at a proper early harvest date, and unlike things like Soissons, we have got very competitive competitive yield level. Kirsty did mention, is it a Grafton replacement? And I know Grafton was, in certain areas it was very, very popular. Grafton as an early driller was very quiet in the autumn. It sort of came up and went flat sideways. Parkin is a little bit more vigorous. It's more like a Skyfall or a Kerin or something like that. So it's not, silly early drilling, but it does have the good standing and decent grain, the performance in the early drilled slot. So yes and no. The other key thing I think is this has got a 5.5 for Septorius. So, that is going to need looking after in that higher risk slot. But it does move early in the spring, and I guess, Gareth, a question for you, being a man from the West. I mean, this sort of spreading of workload with early moving varieties, could be quite valuable, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right, John. There's no point in everything being ready at exactly the right time. If you can use varieties to sort of spread your workload, then it's got to be a good thing, definitely.
Cool. Thanks. And we were sort of worried, how do you try and get some of this sort of value of earliness? And actually, if you look at the amount of grain that can be harvested with one combine, Nick's says about 20 hectares a day being an average, but obviously some of the bigger units are 35 odd hectares. That's a lot of grain that can get harvested in a day. And if we can be looking at the first few days of August or end of July, that is all to our benefit. I mean, particularly with establishing things like oilseed rape.
Thank you, John. I think pass over straight to Julie to talk through the oilseed rape. Jules, over to you.
Thanks for that, John, and it's wonderful to have you all here. I'm only going to talk to you about 2 varieties today, so by no means an extensive look at our portfolio. The first one is Campus, which should need absolutely no introduction to you. It was first introduced in 2014. It's been a very popular variety on farm, probably the #1 variety for the last 3 to 4 years. And that's because of its reliability. It's extremely vigorous and is robust in terms of its agronomics and disease. It has twin 6s for light leaf spot and stem canker, and also is very good tolerance to verticillium stem stripe. Basically, the variety just gets better year after year, and even though it's been taken off the list, it still is a control, and it sits, if it were on the list, it would sit at 102% gross output. For a variety that's been in the market so long, I think that really says quite a lot about it. And it's very vigorous both in the spring and the autumn for a conventional variety, so valuable in this post-neonic era. The other variety I want to talk to you about is Blazen, which is a new recommendation for the north. It's short and stiff. It has a slightly better disease package than Campus, with a 6 and a 7 and good verticillium tolerance too. It's high gross output, and one of the other points about Blazen is it's available on our KWS Oilseed Establishment Partnership. This is a risk-sharing partnership where the grower essentially pays about 50% up front when he purchases the seed, and then once the crop is established, pays a hectareage fee for the crop that is established. For more information on that, please just go to our website where you will find details of the scheme. And that's it on the oilseed rape. So back to you, James.
Thank you, Jules. Thank you very much. So, thank you very much for everybody for listening and tuning in, and thank you to all of our speakers. We're now at the part of the session where we're going to do the question and answers. So if there's anything that we haven't covered that you've got to ask us, whether they be seed rates, recommendations in terms of any agronomics or what varieties would fit each situation, please stick them on the questions. In terms of the screen should change now for you guys. We have in the top left-hand corner our variety guide. So I would recommend you all to download that. In there you will find all of our products, from all the cereals, the oilseeds, pulses, maize and sugar beet, Everything is in there, but also, most importantly, is all of our contact details. So the first couple of pages is all of our details. Give us a call. We appreciate this year that you can't see us in the field as often as perhaps we would like it, but please do get in touch and give us a call if you have any questions. And one of the questions we have had during that was from James Kelly, which was, how many septorial resistant genes does Extase have? John, I'm going to pick on you. You're on mute.
On mute.
Twice in one meeting, that's nearly unforgivable. Probably the answer. We know that there are major genes because we do have an understanding of quite a number of major genes within UK and continental breeding programs. So you can track them. You don't generally get a major gene can have a really good effect, but it's sort of its longevity pretty much underlines minor genes in the background, and we're quite confident with what we know with the genetics that there are several major genes coming from some of the parents, but also because those genetics have been used for a while now and successfully across the continent, especially France, that there's good minor genes as well. So we're not worried about something suddenly shifting. I think it's more about this is our opportunity to get people thinking about resistance genes and how to look after them. I mean, farmers for quite a number of years are very happy and well understand tank mixing and what tank mixing does as an anti-resistant strategy. And obviously resistance is now, in varieties, is now part of your anti-resistant strategy. We do need to think about, protecting some of these resistance genes as well.
Thank you, John. So, I mean, there's no more questions coming in for us, so what we'll probably do is draw the session to a close. It's worth mentioning we have been recording this session, so if any part of it you've missed or you'd like to see again, it will appear on YouTube. There will be a link sent round, but if not, look out for the KWS YouTube page and you can find it all on there.
James, I think we're just going to try one more time to go to Stuart, see if we can get a roundup of his sort of conclusions. Can you hear us, Stuart? No, doesn't sound like we can. We did try. Sorry, Stuart. So Stuart is actually going to record something for us and we'll send that round to you. I think it'd be really useful actually to hear from him because he's going to talk about premiums looking ahead and so forth.
We've got one more question actually that's just come in as well. So thank you from Pat Heslop Harrison. What is the future for hybrid rape and longer term in cereals? Jules, do you want to cover the rape one first? Cereals. Do you want to cover the rape one first?
Well, yes, we've actually just been having a discussion internally with regard to this. We are doing a lot of work on hybrid rape because I think we can see, certainly over the last couple of years, that we do need that vigour in the crop to get it away from the cabbage stem flea beetle. However, the flip side is that it is a higher cost, and I think at the moment there is still a demand in the UK for to have both hybrid and conventional varieties available in the market. But the important thing is that whichever we're looking at, they certainly need to have good vigour.
Thank you, Jules. I mean, I suppose we could see another question come in now from Mark Doble, perhaps kind of half-asked in terms of the hybrid cereals. We've seen barley, we've got rye in the market already, wheat is coming, but the issue is going to be, it's going to have to be, perform better than what we've already got in the market. I mean, John is probably you've got a bit more to say on that one than I've got, so I'll throw it to you.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, particularly with the oilseed rape, obviously flea beetle is something that's pretty challenging, and everybody's working on traits, the characteristics from related brassica species, and it's going to be quicker to get them into the market in a hybrid background, so than a conventional background. So I think, yeah, you will see some of the technologies coming through in that background, and because it's quicker, that would be the key thing. In terms of wheat, of course, we are looking at hybrid wheat. We are working on hybrid wheat as the same way we are on hybrid barley. But these systems take a long time to set up. they're not a quicker route compared to conventional breeding. You need to create very diverse pools to then get your big bang with your hybrid cross. So they take a lot of time, and there's some challenges with things like hybrid wheat and production that people are working on to sort out. Really, Kirsty, I mean, would you add anything else to that?
No,
please?
well, I think you've mostly covered it. I would say from an end use perspective as well, obviously there are a number of hurdles to come across with hybrid wheats. I mean, clearly if you're producing for a feed market, maybe the requirements are perhaps less stringent than it would be for a milling wheat, where obviously consistency is king. So potential use, but also a lot of hurdles to jump over as well. So I think, yeah, perfect summary, John. I think, yeah, we are looking at it, and something globally will be really interesting, I think, hybrid wheat, in potential for, maximising production in areas around the world that struggle to date. But in the UK, the breeders have set a tough bar, got high yield potential to beat.
I think you summed it up well there, Kirsty. I think that's the main issue, isn't it? I mean, we've got conventional rapes yielding the same as hybrid rapes in this country. We've got conventional barleys coming that will yield the same as a hybrid barley. It's going to be, can in this country hybrids push that yield bar up?
I think you're right, James. I mean, it's always this thing, but I mean, the analogy I always use is, the amount of technology in your mobile phone these days, the advancement of it has really helped conventional, has helped breeding. So what they can do now was a dream 7 years ago. So we, really sped up the process and understanding within breeding. So yeah, once that technology sort of starts to falter, we might need some other stuff. But at the moment, technology is making us go as fast as we possibly can.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. We've seen no more questions come in, so I think what we'll do is wrap up the session. I mean, as I said before, download the variety guide. All of our contact details are in here, not just for us on this call, but for everybody else. And we would be genuinely pleased to take your call or email and ask any questions we've got. So give us a shout, and thank you so much to all of our speakers from Bayer, from ADM, and from KWS. And thank you all for tuning in today.
Many
Enjoy your lunch.